There are 16 key components to back squatting really well. And the difference between people that are amateurs at it and people that are professionals is really how well you can execute these movements and how long you've been training for them. And like any video that you might see on YouTube or Instagram, it's important to know who you're speaking or who's speaking on the video. You can see my certifications. I have over 30 certifications, and most of them are in mobility, powerlifting, and CrossFit. Even more important, I can back squat 2.5 times my body weight, which is a feat that a very small percentage of people can do. And I can do that because I execute these movements very consistently and very well. And I'm going to show you how I do it. So on the screen here, you can see the 17 or 16 different points of performance for how to do the back squat correctly. They're color-coded by body position. Like these are legs, these are spine, this is like shoulders and upper body, and these are line of action. I'm going to go through them all with you and then rank them in terms of importance. They're all important to do, but some of them are more important. And when you're learning how to do a back squat correctly, the ones that can cause more severe injury or bigger power loss are more important to learn first. So let's start with foot spacing. Foot spacing deals with how wide your feet are relative to your shoulders. Basically, are you hip width, how wide, things like that. You should be shoulder width apart. That's the standard. Any wider you go, you tend to put more stress on your labrum and your hips. Any more narrow than that, you tend not to have enough stability. How important is foot spacing overall? I would say it's in the middle tier at B, where, B are significant things, but they're not, super critical. A is really critical, and C are kind of smaller things that you want to do right. Next, we have turnout or even turnout. That relates to how far your feet should be turned out. 15 to 30 degrees off center with your both feet is important, and making sure that turnout is even. A lot of people have turnout that's not even, and doing that can cause injury. I would put this right next to foot spacing. Honestly, it's about equal importance. What about heels down? Well, if you're going to drive from the floor, you have to have your heels down. Can you do a squat without your heels down? You can, but it's going to put strain on the wrong muscle groups, and it's also going to kind of rob you of a lot of power. I would also say that this is kind of a B tier, but I would put it in front of where we have our foot spacing, because this one's a little bit more important than the other two. What about a hip-initiated squat? That kind of relates to the line of action. Some people, when they're learning, they might break at the knees first rather than using their hips. That's really important because if you don't do this right, the whole squat won't work right. I mean, how injured will you get from it? Well, it's probably going to just make the squat not work well and irritate your knees. So I wouldn't put it in the A tier, but it definitely is important, probably more important even than heels down. I'll correct hip-initiated squat or make sure I'm seeing a hip-initiated squat even before I'll work on the heel position. And then knees out or external hip rotation, that relates to driving your knees outward and rotating your hips outward. The opposite is of course, rotating inward, which can put a lot of stress on your knees. That can cause a lot of injury and is one of the more severe faults you can have on a squat. So I'm going to put that one up in A tier. Bracing / losing the brace. That's a really important thing. The back squat is one of the most important movements to brace. If you don't maintain your brace, you can get seriously injured. It's probably one of the most important things to do, and it's also something that I see beginners struggle with and coaches not reinforce enough. Teaching people how to brace and how to use a belt is an essential part of this back squat. I would put that even ahead of where you see knees out, because I'd rather have a knee injury than a back injury any day. Avoiding the butt wink, that deals with when your pelvis rotates underneath you when you're coming to the bottom of the squat. It is like an anterior rotation of the pelvis or dumping your pelvis. It is a hard thing for beginners to fix because they can't really feel it till they have some practice. And that's a really good thing to get a strong coach to help you with. You can hurt yourself pretty severely as the weights get high by butt winking. And I would say it's probably, an A tier and, just after knees out. I typically don't see too many injuries on this when the weights are light, but when they get heavy, you definitely can get injured. So this is definitely a key piece. Breath control relates to bracing, maintaining, holding your breath essentially when you're doing very heavy weights, or timing of your breath is really important. We're only really going to breathe when we're in a static position on top. And if it's very heavy, we're going to hold our breath throughout the whole lift. I think breath control is probably one of the top B tiers because you can do lighter squats with it. It's only when you get to really heavier squats that it's super important. And it is one of the first things I'll coach. It's either top B tier or bottom A tier. What about a neutral spine? Neutral spine is like one of the most important things you'll see in squatting. It's probably just as important, probably more important than the brace, honestly, because if you don't have neutral spine, you're going to load your spine unevenly. And unless it's really light, this is a way you can get injured on the back squat. And when I'm going very heavy, this is always something I'm focusing on. I'm also focusing on breath control for sure and making sure I don't lose my brace. What about balance across the frontal plane? That means that the weight of the barbell must be kind of equally distributed between your anterior and posterior chain so that the weight's kind of right on your heels and across your body. How important is that? It's super important because if you don't do this, it's almost impossible to keep a neutral spine. So we're going to stick it up here in A tier. Jury's out whether it's more important than bracing. They're both really important. Neutral neck and head position. This is one of the most common faults I see. People love to look up on the bottom of a squat. The reason this is a fault is if you do that, you put your thoracic spine in an extension, which then puts your lumbar spine kind of in the opposite direction, and it prevents you from keeping a neutral spine. I don't usually see a lot of injuries from thoracic extension and then cervical extension, but you do see a ton of power loss. I know when weights get heavy for me, I want to, I want to extend my thoracic spine, but it doesn't generate more power. You lose power when you do that. And, for that reason, it's a really key thing to doing very well. Can you still squat with, an extended cervical spine or, lifting your head up? Sure you can, but it's not as effective and it's not as safe. But still, I would stick it in C tier because unless the weights are really heavy, I don't typically see too many injuries from this fault. Let's move on to having your shoulders externally rotated. We want to have our shoulders externally rotated so that we can activate the supraspinatus, which is the kind of top shoulder muscles. This is where your bar is going to be positioned, and these two are very, very related. Right, we want to position the bar on our supraspinatus so that we have the bar as far back as possible. That helps us maintain a neutral spine as well as balance across the frontal plane. If the bar is too high, it can hurt our neck. If it's too far back, which is rare for people because you need to show mobility, it's probably hard to hold on the bar. So most people just try to get the bar as far back as possible to balance across the frontal plane, maintain a neutral spine. So I would put this one as a C tier. You can still do a squat with the bar too far up as long as it's not on your neck, but it tends to cause people to go up on their toes and other faults. So poor bar position leads to poor execution of some of these other moves unless you compensate for it. Externally rotating the shoulders places the shoulders in a safer position, also helps secure the bar. You wind up pulling the bar forward while having your shoulders in external rotated position. That creates a secure connection. So when you move, you transfer all the force into the bar and it doesn't move around on you. I would put this one here. It's one of the last things I teach compared to these. I don't see a ton of injuries with this. It just kind of takes away some efficiency. Hand spacing on the bar, that one also goes in C tier. It's similar. If you don't have the right hand spacing, this becomes very difficult to do. Having the right hand spacing allows you to apply more pressure to the bar and make it connected to your body as you drive upwards on the squat. Hand position is slightly different. So you can grasp the bar in different ways, right? So I'd like to press with this part of my hand as like a low bar squat. I find I can generate a lot more force. If I grab the bar, in my whole hand, it tends to cause my wrists to bend. It's hard to keep everything flexed, or my forearms flexed, which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people prefer low bar. So learning the hand position on low bar, I think is counterintuitive for beginners, but it is a really effective way to keep the bar locked in the right position. Let's move on to our 2 line of action items, which are the green ones. So this one is one of the big ones we see in CrossFit, hip crease below parallel. I'm going to stick it in B tier. If you don't work full range, you never develop full range, and that can lead to injury. Of course, in any powerlifting competition, we have to go below parallel. But for beginners, is it the most important thing? No, it's not more important than anything in A. I'd also say it's probably not more important than anything before B. It's still important though. And if you're coaching people on squats, I recommend that you lower their weight so that they can get below parallel at a lighter weight. That's a better way to develop strength. If you do not use that range, you'll never develop it. So yes, it's really important, but you're not likely to have an injury from it if you don't do it. Lockout on top, I would put that one probably in C tier as well. That's not usually something I see people have trouble with unless you're trying to move too fast because of the workout. What should be locked out on top? Well, your hips and your knees need to be locked out for full range. The only time I tend to see this to be a problem is if we're doing a workout with lots of squats and people are trying to improve their speed in which they're executing them, because the locked out position on the squat on top is the resting position. Most people intuitively find that. So there you go. That is all 16/17 points of performance for the back squat, all ranked by importance. I hope this video was helpful for you and that you have a great coach to help you improve on your squat. This has been Paul with Sandsdale, and I appreciate you joining me. Bye.